And a lot of sponsors are smaller and can't afford or want to build the capacity in-house to do things themselves. So they outsource critical components of this. For example, the outsourced manufacturing or even the clinical trials themselves. But doing that does not absolve the sponsor of responsibility for compliance. And so having to understand how to comply with the various FDA and all the other different rules that exist in the world, that doesn't go away. And in order to do that, therefore, you have to oversee your own compliance functions. Because if you don't, you're abrogating responsibility to someone else, but you don't abrogate the responsibility when the regulatory authorities come calling. When selecting a manufacturer, a sponsor, or even when you're also picking a clinical research organization, a sponsor has to look for people with a history of good compliance. And by good compliance, I mean when they've been inspected, they've not had a lot of problems. One of my favorite analogies with this kind of thing is think about your car mechanic. We all go on Yelp these days or some similar thing like that to say, hey, has there been issues before? Have people been satisfied? Well, you should do the same thing when selecting a manufacturer. Yes, they're technically competent, but you really want to look to make sure that they're also regulatory proficient. Because if they're not, you'll have issues. It's not unusual for one of our clients to get hung up because a different client of that manufacturing or CRO has an issue and everything gets put on hold. You don't want that to happen to you, so you have to make sure you want to audit them in advance, for example, to make sure they know what they're doing. These are expensive functions. If you're outsourcing your manufacturing, especially in a clinical trial, or outsourcing your clinical behaviors and your clinical trials, there's millions of dollars at stake here. The more proscribed you can make it for the outsourced vendor, the easier for the vendor to do the right job. So a contract and a quality agreement will blend together to make sure that the manufacturer or clinical research organization does the right thing. And when they deviate, now you have the legal argument as to why did you deviate? We agreed on paper as to what you were supposed to do. Gives you a framework for discussion, debate, and hopefully amelioration if something goes wrong. Sponsors are responsible for everything that they do with regard to a drug, really on two levels. One is regulatorily, the FDA holds them responsible, the federal government does. And also on a civil basis, if there's an ultimate problem with your drug, the lawyers will hold you responsible. So you can't abrogate responsibility to your contract manufacturer, to your clinical research organization. You can't let anybody else just take control. When you cede control, you cede the ability to have maintenance over your own future, and that's a bad place to be. So you want to audit, you want to have quality agreements, you want to have written contracts for all of those different pieces. A lot of our clients are on the smaller side and don't necessarily recognize they need to do this, but it will cost them in the long run. If there is a problem, if FDA comes calling, they don't only look at the manufacturer, they go right to the sponsor. So having control over your own capacity and your own product, I think, is a mandatory thing to do in this industry.